As the West mounts pressure and his army tires down, President Putin isn't showing signs of backing down. But what really are the Russian president's options? With his nukes now on alert, is a furious and frustrated Putin about to escalate the war? That's the one question that's being asked globally.
A lightning invasion has dragged out into a grinding war. With Putin's giant military convoys crippled by logistics, Ukrainian cities ruined but still standing, and Russia in the death grip of global sanctions. Fears are rising that Putin has been pressured so much that he may actually climb the escalation ladder. On the ground, there are already signs that a tireless Putin is not prepared to dial things down, but rather intensify his operation. Consider the following from just the last 4 days. Proof 1. Nuclear forces on alert. For starters, Team Putin's language is now fully nuclear, brandishing the possible use of nuclear weapons as if they were conventional and raising temperatures to the maximum. It doesn't help that Putin has already put his nuclear arsenal on operational alert. Proof 2. Nuclear-capable weapons. Russia has debuted its long-range Kinzhal nuclear-capable air-launched strike weapon against Ukrainian targets. This was the first use of the weapon in combat, and it signals a definite escalation in the strength being brought to the battlefield. Proof number 3. Long-range weapons. The Russian Defense Ministry is in overdrive, putting out videos of long-range strikes on strategic assets of Ukraine, including this missile launch claimed to have destroyed a Ukrainian weapons depot in the western city of Ravine. Also signaling that the western part of the country, which shares borders with NATO nations, isn't off limits to Russian strikes. Proof 4. Creating case for more damage. Over the last week, Russia has been building a case for greater damage, but pointing out on a daily basis that Ukraine has been using civilian areas for military operations, like this drone video of a Ukrainian shopping center being used to reload missiles and rockets during a firing exchange.
I don't think Russia needs to defend anything at this point. I mean, we have our own, again, national security interests. Mind you, doing what no NATO member has ever done, protecting the civilian population inside that same country, that was a threat to our national security interests.
Proof number 5. NATO arms flooding Ukraine. The fifth indicator is that delaying an escalation would mean Ukraine gets even better armed with NATO weapons. The country is already awash with new generation anti-tank and anti-air weaponry, and much more is clearly inbound, as India Today's Gaurav Sawant personally witnessed in this world-exclusive report.
Are these American troops here as part of a North Atlantic Treaty Organization country NATO military exercise? They started coming here. The initial troops or the pioneers came in between mid to end February, and the larger number of troops are still coming in.
Putin is under pressure, and with each passing hour, that pressure to act is spiraling. For a month, the world has held its breath, and it's holding its breath even harder now. With Geeta Mohan in Moscow and Gaurav Sawant in Warsaw, Bureau Report, India Today.
To get a sense of the key takeaways of this big NATO summit, I'm joined live on this broadcast from Warsaw in Poland by our strategic affairs editor Gaurav Sawant. Joining us from Moscow live tonight is our foreign affairs editor Geeta Mohan. Gador Cascales joins us from the NATO headquarters in Brussels. I want to go across to Gador Cascales first to understand from her the message you think President Putin and other NATO world leaders are sending to the world, and most importantly to President Putin, in terms of how they hope to unite in putting more pressure on the Russian army and the Russian state at this juncture in the war.
Yeah, thank you. Good evening, everyone. And just 1 month after Russian invasion of Ukraine, NATO, the G7 and the European Council are meeting to take further measures against Russia and, of course, its president, Vladimir Putin. And the meeting started today at 10 a.m. and brought together the world's top leaders, including the president of the United States, Joe Biden, and the president of Ukraine, Vladimir Zelensky, who will participate in all meetings telemetrically. During his speech, Zelensky stressed that while NATO is not guilty at all of what is happening right now, it can help the Ukrainian people from Russian missiles by giving them everything they ask for, which is fighter aircraft and non-flying zone. The summits will seek to agree on European energy, security and defense measures. And the British government, for example, has just announced a new set of sanctions against 65 Russian companies, oligarchs and politicians. And on the other hand, for example, Poland has blocked all the bank accounts of the Russian embassy in Poland on the grounds that they were used to finance terrorist activities. And meanwhile, in Ukraine, the situation is terrible. Around 3.7 million Ukrainians have already left the country to seek refuge abroad. NATO has doubled its military deployment in eastern countries in response to the presence of the Russian military in Ukraine. Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg announced that the Atlantic Summit will approve the deployment of new battalions in Bulgaria, Romania, Hungary and Slovakia. The new positions are in addition of those already deployed in Poland, Estonia, Lithuania and Lithuania. For the moment, we are waiting for the meeting, for the end of the meeting to see what NATO next steps will be.
Thanks, Gador. I want to understand from Geeta Mohan in Moscow how Russia is looking at these developments. The fact that President Putin is going to be coming to Poland, is in Brussels at this moment, sending a very, at least trying to send a message of unity and solidarity in favor of the people of Ukraine and against President Putin. How is Moscow looking at this?
Well, Rahul, I'm standing here right outside the Red Square. This is the city center, but also the center of Russia. And the centrality of this entire crisis for Moscow is that there are red lines, that Ukraine, that the West, that certainly NATO cannot cross. And that's the message. Moscow sharply was watching the developments when it comes to the NATO summit, the meetings of the West and the meetings between Ukraine and the West, be it the European Union or for that matter, NATO member states. But the fact of the matter is that Moscow, as also Ukraine, now realizes and acknowledges that there's only that much that NATO is going to do. We've seen battle groups after battle groups, weapons after weapons, and fighter jets after fighter jets being sent to NATO member states. Not a single boot on the ground in Ukraine. They have not come to Ukraine's rescue, and that is the reality. That's the fact that President Zelensky will have to accept and see whether if there can be a negotiated settlement. For Moscow as of now, while there are extreme sanctions, Rahul, but this is a country that has dealt with sanctions, lived with sanctions, and the domestic financial structure is strong enough. How long can they withstand the sanctions is the big question, and will that be Russia looking at the sanctions and crumbling before Ukraine, or Ukraine crumbling before Russia? And if that happens, a negotiated settlement is the only way out. Moscow understands that, realizes that. Does Ukraine really understand that is the question.
Gaurav Sawant, what will be President Biden's agenda when he's at Poland? You're in Warsaw. How are people there looking at President Biden's visit and sitting where you are at this moment, standing where you are at this moment, your sense of the significance of this NATO summit and the messages of unity and solidarity that are emerging from Brussels?
Message of solidarity and unity extremely important as far as NATO is concerned, but will it translate into action on ground? President Zelensky is very desperate, dejected, yet defiant. He wants virtually a blank check of military hardware. He says, are we any inferior to any of the NATO armies the way that they've held the Russian forces for 29 days and counting? He wants anti-ship missiles. He wants anti-aircraft guns. He wants anti-aircraft missiles. How much of this will he continue to get in the days ahead remains the big question, because he wants them in very large quantities, given the fact that a part of his country has virtually been torn off. Russia controls the Black Sea, and European Union now saying that those huge supplies of wheat, ships laden with wheat for the 3 million internally displaced people in Ukraine is not being permitted by Russia to come into this country. So he requires a lot. President Zelensky requires a lot. Is he getting only lip service, lip sympathy and some military hardware, which may just be too little and too late to protect his country, given that the Russian army continues its advance, Rahul? But it's not just Ukraine now. Countries like Poland, where I am right now, they are apprehensive. They are apprehensive about what Russia will do in the years ahead. Some of the measures that they are taking are for stronger defense of their country. For example, they want more American boots on ground. They want more American missiles on ground, more American hardware on ground than what is already available here to be able to effectively counter Russia in the years to come. Because in case Ukraine actually collapses, then Poland will be sharing a border with a very pro-Russia regime, and that would be Poland's worst nightmare. That is why Poland, while willing to offer its MiG-29s to Ukraine, is apprehensive about giving it directly, would rather park them at Germany. But that is where it becomes a non-starter, and that perhaps is the crux of the problem right now for Ukraine. A lot of promises, brave words, a pat on the back, but not much else apart from humanitarian assistance and missiles. And
so
they
Gador
require a lot
sums
more.
it up well, that you've got a lot of expression of solidarity, patting on the back, you're doing well, we want to be with you, we want to support you, but not as much real, concrete military support, which is what President Zelensky and his people need at this time. We'll keep tracking this visit. Geeta is in Moscow. She'll be traveling to the forward areas where this war is taking place on the Russian side. Gaurav is currently in Poland. He also will be heading back into Ukraine. We'll bring you their reportage. But for the time being, thank you. It's been 1 month since President Putin launched a full-scale invasion of Ukraine in the early hours of the 24th of February, sparking the biggest war on a European state since the Second World War. In the month since the invasion began, more than 10 million people have been displaced, several Ukrainian towns and cities besieged and bombarded beyond recognition, and hundreds of civilians have been killed. As Ukraine braces for a second month of bombing, destruction and deaths, here is what's left behind.
I decided to conduct a special military operation. It aims to protect people who have been bullied and subjected to genocide by Kyiv regime for 8 years.
It all started with an early morning broadcast that stunned the world. The future of millions of Ukrainians changed with the blink of an eye. Now, a month and counting, Ukraine has survived ruthless bombing, brutal attacks, and endless hellscape. Russian forces are struggling to capture key Ukrainian cities, including Kyiv and Kharkiv. Kyiv still stands firm. Heavily outnumbered and outmuscled, yet Ukraine is giving them a bloody nose.
I thank everyone who acts in support of Ukraine, in support of freedom, but the war continues. The acts of terror against peaceful people go on. 1 month already. That's long. It breaks my heart, hearts of all Ukrainians and every free person on the planet.
The war has spared no one. Toddlers, kids, youngsters, elderly, all victims. Since the Russian invasion of Ukraine, over 10 million people have fled their homes, mostly women and children. With each passing hour, Ukraine war is fast becoming the fastest growing humanitarian crisis Europe has seen since the Second World War. Diplomatic efforts are on to secure a ceasefire, and yet reports of civilian deaths in Ukrainian cities continue to make headlines. Once a bustling, lively and colorful country, many Ukrainian cities are becoming ghost towns. Bureau Report, India Today.